Hey, good day, everybody, and welcome to this year's final Thoughts from the Word. Today, we want to discuss a meeting that takes place way back in December of 518 BCE between a delegation who comes from the little town of Bethel to Jerusalem to ask some questions of the priests and the prophets that are in Jerusalem at the time. The question and the answer had implications both for them and I believe for us in the world we live in today. We'll get back to our thought in just a moment. We want to remind you that Morning Coffee and a Thought, or Thoughts from the Word, can be seen on our YouTube channel every Friday beginning at 1 p.m. and then on our Facebook page beginning at 8 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and we hope you will join us. If these thoughts or messages minister to you, we hope you would subscribe or like our YouTube channel. Also, if you want information, if you have a prayer request, or you want to make a donation to this ministry, you can do all of that at wingsoffaithministries.ca. Now let's get back to our question and answer. Back in 586 BCE, the final fall of Jerusalem would occur. The temple would be destroyed, and the remaining Jews that were left in Israel were now deported throughout the Babylonian Empire. But even though they were scattered throughout the empire, the Jews still commemorated through fasting certain important occurrences in their minds, mainly revolving around the final destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. And so they would fast on the 4th month, the 5th month, the 7th month, and the 10th month of the year, commemorating different events around the fall of the city of Jerusalem. This went on for over 68 years. Then, of course, under Cyrus, the Jews were allowed to return home around 536 BCE. As they come home, of course, the first thing they want to accomplish is the rebuilding of their temple, which they begin and lay the foundations in the first 2 years. But the building of the temple stops after there's some opposition from their neighbors. And so 2 prophets arrive in Israel, Haggai and Zechariah, who come there in 520 BCE to try and encourage the exiles who have returned to rebuild and finish the temple they had started. Now, while this is going on, in 2 years before the completion of the temple, some people from Bethel, a delegation led by a couple of community leaders, come to Jerusalem to inquire of the Lord through the priests that are there and the prophets that are stationed there, including the prophet Zechariah. And so the question they bring to the priest and the prophet is this: we have been fasting on these months for the last 68 years. Now that we've returned to Israel, should we continue with these religious activities? Or, now that we're home, should we stop commemorating these events and cease participating in these activities? Zechariah will seek the Lord and come back with a word. And here's the question. The question to the delegation is this: when you are fasting these 4 times a year, involving yourself in these religious activities, who were you actually doing it for? Were you really doing it for me? Or were you doing it and participating in it simply to feel good about yourselves? Now that's an interesting question, and I think it's very relevant to where we are today and where the church is today. Why are we participating in religious activities? Be it going to church on Sunday mornings or being part of the church community. Are we doing it actually for ourselves, or are we really doing it because we're responding to the love that God has shown to us through Christ Jesus? Zechariah will answer them this way. He will go on to say to them, before the fall of Jerusalem, prophets were sent to you who asked you the very same question that I'm asking you now. They came to you and they said to you, yes, you observe Sabbath days, you do the Day of Atonement, you involve yourselves in religious activities, but where are your hearts in the day-to-day living of your communities? What were you doing about the poor? What were you doing about widows? What were you doing about aliens and homeless people? How did you treat them? What was your attitude towards them? Constantly the prophets warned you about your behavior towards your fellow man. Yes, you involved yourself in religious observances and activities, but your day-to-day life, your love for one another, did not match your faith. What's worse than that is when the prophets came to warn you about it, you simply turn your backs on the word of the Lord. And so what was the result of that? Zechariah tells them the result was the Lord saying, when I called out to you and wanted to get your attention, you'd have no part of it. You wouldn't listen. You were stubborn. You continued with your behavior and your systematic abuse of the lower classes. So, when you called out to me, I refused to listen, and so came the fall of your nation, the fall of Jerusalem, and the fall and the burning of your temple. Interesting that when we have hard hearts, as Zechariah was saying, when we have hard hearts toward our fellow man and simply involve ourselves in religious activities, who are we really doing it for? In Luke chapter 11, a Pharisee invites Jesus to come to his house for lunch. He had heard Jesus speaking and was intrigued. And so, as Jesus sits down to eat, he fails to do the ceremonial washing of the hands, which was customary for Jews to do before they partook of a meal. Jesus must have noticed that the Pharisee looked shocked that Jesus did not wash his hands before eating. But Jesus then turns to those gathered that day at the meal and starts issuing woes to the religious class. And strangely enough, they're the exact same woes and criticisms that were delivered by Zechariah 500 years earlier. Jesus says to them, you observe all the outward observances of Judaism. Why? To make sure that people knew that you were observing all these things. Sabbath day regulations, making sure you show up to synagogue services and meetings. Anything that took outward observance, the Pharisees were there, showing the masses that they meticulously were obeying the law. However, Jesus said to them, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. He said, when people run into you and touch you, it's like touching a grave. You're dead on the inside. If people even came close, Jewish people, to grave sites or walked on a grave, they become defiled. And now Jesus is telling these Pharisees that if people came close to them or touched them, it'd be like touching a whitewashed tomb. They tithed their goods, but they cared nothing for the poor, the homeless, the foreigner, or the widow. Jesus said they only cared about showing themselves as observant Jews to others. But in their day-to-day living, they never once would go out of their way to help anyone or to help society in general be better. Jesus would say the same things were going to happen to them that Jeremiah talked about back 500 years earlier. Zechariah told them that if they didn't listen to God, if their stubborn hearts continued to act in such a way, God would refuse in future to listen to them. Jesus was saying almost the exact same thing to those gathered at that dinner that day. He said to them, I sent you prophets, I sent you teachers, I sent all sorts of people with the message of God to warn you about your behavior. And all you did was persecute them or kill them and refuse to listen to their message. He then said that the generation he was a part of would be accountable for what had happened to those prophets. That's a very clear message, a very clear warning. It was clear to the people in Zechariah's time. It was clear to the people sitting around that dinner table with Jesus. But it's a question and a warning that we have to look at ourselves. Where is the church at? We may participate in all sorts of activities, religious or otherwise, but what are we doing in our day-to-day lives to minister to those around us? No, we can't feed all the people in our communities, and we don't know everyone who's hard-pressed. But we can have our hearts open to be led by the Spirit of God to minister to those around us and to show not just religious observance, but the true love of Jesus Christ. That's what the Pharisees and the religious establishment was missing in Jesus' time. That's what the people of Israel were missing in Zechariah's time. The day-to-day ministry of those around them who had needs, but never took care of them. Even those that God blatantly put before them, they just looked the other way. As we end this year and go into 2025, there's an admonishment that Zechariah will give to those who have been sent to question him. He says to those people, administer true justice. And that's what I feel should be our mindset in 2025. Let's administer true justice. What does that mean? Reflecting the love that God had for us to those around us in any way that the Spirit of God leads us. Let's not look by people. Let's not look the other way when needs come before us. But let's show the love that Christ showed us to those around us. Administer true justice. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you again next year.